Gittin Daf Ayin Gimel is divided into two halves by a Mishnah. First half of the daf is discussing what happens when somebody gives a get while he's desperately sick and he's about to die. The Gemara is first going to discuss halacha that Rav Huna said, that Rabba and Rava disagree, and then the Gemara will talk about what happens if something else kills him while he is still sick with this illness. So let's begin. The Gemara is just brought Rav Huna. Rav Huna has said that if a person gives a get while he's sick, even if he doesn't say that I'm giving you this get because I'm sick and on the condition that I die from this get, it should be chal. Even though he doesn't say anything about the sickness, we still assume that he gave it because of the sickness and he does not want the get to take effect if he recovers. And therefore, if he does recover, he can be chayzer, he can back out, stay married, and the get is canceled, and he's still married. That was Rav Huna's halacha, even if he didn't say so. So the Gemara, Rabba and Rava disagree. Rabba and Rava say, unless he specifies that this get is on the condition that I die, then the get is chal, and he can't back out, even he can't back out if he recovers. So Gemara says, what's the reasoning? Rabba and Rava's reasoning is they're afraid people are going to end up learning a wrong halacha. They're going to learn that a get could take effect after the death of the person. Why? Because if the get is not chal unless he dies, that means we don't know if it's ever going to be chal until he actually will die. If that's the case, people are going to say that it's chal when he dies. If it's chal when he dies, then people are going to learn that the wrong halacha, that a get could be chal after the death of the husband, which is not true. Therefore, we can't have a situation where it's dependent on his death that the get is chal, and therefore even if he recovers, the get is chal anyway, and he can't back out and stay married. So Gemara asks, a question which we've had many times in Masechta, that means you're telling me that midaraisa, the get really is canceled and he's still married. But the Rabbanon are saying that because we have concerns, we're going to make the get be chal. That means daraisa, this lady is a married woman, and we're saying that she's divorced. How do we have a right to free a married woman to the shuk? The answers the Rabbanon could take away a person's kedushin. We say that he's mekadesher ad daita de Rabbanon kedas ma'ashav Yisrael. Therefore, they could say we no longer agree. They're mafkia the kesef kedushin from him. They take away his ownership of the money, and even if he was mekadesh b'bia, they can make the bia into a bia's nos by canceling the kedushin. Therefore, the Rabbanon do have the power to do that. Okay, now the Gemara goes into what happens if he gives a get while he's sick, and then he's killed by something else clearly unrelated to the sickness. Gemara brings a brisa with two cases, a Reish and a Seifa, both really same case. The only difference is what he says. So the Reish says that he gives her the get, and he says this get is going to be chal from today if I die from this disease, and then the house collapses on him or he's bitten by a snake, and he dies because of that. Says the Gemara, in that case, he's not chal. However, if he said it differently, if he said, if I don't recover from this illness, then the house fell on him or he's been by a snake, then it is chal. Now, the simple difference between if he says, if I die from this, and if I don't recover from this, is that if I die from it means that it's the sickness that kills me. If I don't recover, it just means I don't know what kills me, but if I don't get out of this, then it's a get. That would be a simple understanding, but the Gemara says, hold on a second, let's think about it. Does he consider an einus, like a house falling on him or being bitten like a snake, does he consider that possibility when he says things? If he considers the possibility, then it should be included in what he's saying when he says that if I die from this, what's the difference if he died because of the sickness or he died from something else? He's trying to give her the get if he dies. And if it's something that he doesn't think of, so then even if he says if I don't recover, so what's the difference if he don't recover for this or something else? He didn't think of that possibility. It's not something he had in mind. It shouldn't be considered in what he meant. So the Gemara says we had a story that happened in Eretz Yisrael where a guy made a similar condition and he ended up being eaten by a lion. And it seemed to be that we said that a person does not think of an einus like that, and he does not take that into consideration. So the Gemara hasn't really answered the contradiction between the first case and the last case. So Gemara brings another incident that refers back to this problem. Gemara says there was somebody who sold land to his friend, and he accepted upon himself that if any einus happens, if any way the land gets ruined in some non-preventable circumstance, I'm going to reimburse you for the land that you bought from me. In the end, the king ended up having a river redirected onto that land, and the land was totally ruined because it became underwater, it became a river. So the buyer wanted to make good on the promise. He wanted to collect that reimbursement. So they went to Ravina. Ravina said, so you have to go and you have to pay him because you accepted any einus that happens. So Rav Acha bar Tachlifa said to Ravina, but this is a very infrequent type of inus, and he didn't think of it. And if he didn't think of it, then it's not included in the promise that he made. So he ended up having a machlekes here. So it went from Rabbanim to Rabbanim until it came to Rava, and Rava said, Allah is that it's an inus that's not shchiach, and a person not responsible for it. So Ravina asked Rava, but what about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says clearly in the Seifa, in the last case, it says, if I don't recover from this illness, and then a house falls on him or gets bitten by a snake, it is a good get. So you see, it's considered to be a fulfillment of his Tanai, which means it is something that he thought of. So Rava says, okay, but it's contradicted by the Reisha, where he said, if I die from this, and it's not a get, and obviously it's something that he didn't think of. So he said, okay, so just because you have a contradiction between the Reish and the Sefer, you're not going to bring a proof from the Sefer? He said, yeah, since there's a contradiction between the Reish and the Sefer, this wasn't discussed in the Yeshiva, and therefore it's not valid brisa, and it's obviously a mistake, and you can't bring a proof from it. Therefore, we should go with logic, and the logic could be that you don't think of it and it doesn't count as an inus, and you don't need to pay for it. Then Gemara brings another story. Gemara says, Rav Papa and Rav Huda Beit Rav Yeshua bought sesame, a lot of sesame from someone, and they hired people with ships to bring it to their house by driving it down the river, and then the government closed off the river and they weren't able to drive it anymore. So they said to those who brought the ships, you're responsible. You promised, and the case was that they had accepted any inus which happened. So they said, you're responsible. You said any inus you're responsible for. So go hire wagon drivers with donkeys, whatever it is, bring it over land, because you took responsibility for it. So the guy went running to Rava. So Rava said, same sack. He said, these old geese, these white geese, referring to the Chachamim, as white geese because they had long white beards, he said, they're trying to rip off the shirt from this guy's back, and it's inappropriate because Allah is not like that, because this is considered to be an infrequent type of inus that a person is not responsible to think of. We now begin the next Mishnah, which discusses if a man gave his wife a get, saying that you're going to be divorced from today, on the condition that I die from this disease. So from now until he dies, what is her halacha? When we don't know if he's going to die, so we don't know if she's going to end up being divorced or not. So the Mishnah discusses two halves. It discusses what's her halacha relative to him, to her husband, and what's her halacha relative to everybody else. Let's go to the end of the Mishnah first, where we discuss her halacha relative to everyone else. The Mishnah says this machlekes between Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yehuda when the get takes effect. Rabbi Yehuda holds, even though we said that it's a get from today, on the condition that I die, it doesn't take effect until a moment before he dies. It doesn't take effect from today. And therefore, from today until he dies, until a moment before he dies, until an instant before he dies, there's no problem. She's not a suffix divorced. She's vaday not divorced. Even if he's going to die, it's going to take effect soon. And therefore, as far as other people are concerned, she's fully married. She's an Eshes Ish. If somebody's Mazana with her, B'mezid, he'll get Chenek, he'll get Misa, and B'shaygig, he'll have to bring Karban Chatos. We don't consider it a suffix at all. Rabbi Yosi learns different. Rabbi Yosi learns if he dies from this, then the get takes effect from now, which means that this entire interim period, we don't know what's going to end up happening. Because if he ends up dying from it, then it turns out that she was divorced all along. And therefore, if somebody's Mazana with her, it's a suffix. If somebody's not with her, B'shaygig, B'mezid, it's a suffix. There's nothing you cannot give him misa, and you can't bring karban chatas. Now, the first part of the Mishnah discusses what is her halacha relative to him, to her husband. Now, he's already given her the get, even if it doesn't take effect yet. He's already given her the get. He is now an Isser B on her. If he's going to have B with her, there's an opinion that holds we have to be chayshish that he gave her, that this B that he did is l'shem kedushin, and that's another kedushin which overrides the get that he was already given her, especially if the get's going to be chal before, and then he does bia afterwards. That's a kedushin that comes after the bia. And then she would require another get for that bia, which may have been a bia l'shem kedushin. To avoid that problem, we have to make sure that he doesn't have any yichud with her. So, he has to avoid yichud. If he wants to be with her, he has to have witnesses. Witnesses could be an evet, could be a shivcha. It can't be her shivcha because she's not worried about what her shivcha sees, because she feels in control. She's liba gasba over her shivcha. So anyone else can be any other woman or any other evet could be a valid aid to prevent that yichud from turning into a shayla v'biyah. The Gemara now begins by quoting a very puzzling sounding brisa that the Gemara is going to have to figure out and have a discussion how it works. The brisa has three halachos which seem to contradict each other. So it says, if you had yichud with her in the dark, or he slept with her in the bed, We are not concerned maybe they had tashmish. We are concerned because of znus. The third halacha, it seems to be a third halacha, is we're not concerned because of kiddushin. And then you have Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, who argues and says we are concerned because of kiddushin. So you have three halachas with a machalokes on the third one. So what's happening? How these all contradict each other. What's going on? So Rav Nachman, in the name of Rabbi Baravua, says as follows. We say that we are not afraid of that if they did yichud in the dark or in the bed, we're not afraid of biyah means you don't have to assume that a biyah happened. Second halacha, we are concerned for znos. That means if we know that znos happened, if we know that they did a biyah, you have to be concerned that it was l'shem kiddushin, and therefore they're mukadeshes, and it's a get yashan, and you require another get from them. Now, the last halacha that you're not chayshish for kiddushin, that means if we saw that he gave her money, then we don't have to be afraid of kiddushin from the biyah, because we could assume that he's paying her for the biyah, and that he's treating her like a zayna, and therefore the biyah was a znus, not a kiddushin, and the money that he's giving her is a payment as a zayna. On that, Rabbi Yehuda argues, and he says, no, how do you know that the payment was as a zayna? Maybe the payment was as a gift. It's very logical that he was mekadesh her now, and now it's a new kiddushin, so he's giving her a gift as a new woman that he was mekadesh to. Says Gemara, if this pshat, how do we understand machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai elsewhere in Parak Hazarik? Over there, the Gemara discusses if a man and woman had yichud after they had a get, after he gave her the get, do you have to be chayshesh for a biyah that happened? And there, the Gemara said that if you don't know that a biyah happened, you don't have to assume that it did. Machlokes is if you know that a biyah happened, you have to assume that it was a shem condition or not. So according to with our current explanation of this brisa, everybody agrees here in this brisa. Everybody fits into that because everybody, the two Tanaim in this brisa, agree that if you don't know that a biyah happened, you don't have to assume that a biyah happened, and there's no shayla. Now, the Abaye has a kasha on this pshat, and that's that this doesn't say anything about giving money. That you're adding in here, we're talking about where he gave her money for this. Doesn't say anything about that. So therefore, Abaye wants to say a different pshat. So as Abaye, the pshat is as follows: if you didn't see that they did a biyah, you don't have to be chayshish for a biyah. Same, that part is the same as Rav Nachman. If you did see a biyah, chayshish in mishum znos means you assume that biyah was just a ma'aser znos, and you don't have to be afraid that there's a kiddushin. So the Tanakam is saying, if you know that there was a biyah, you don't have to assume there was a kiddushin. Nothing to do with money. You don't have to assume there was a kiddushin at all. And on that, Rabbi Yosef says, af chayshish in mishum kiddushin, even that you even have to be chayshish that it was a kiddushin, because maybe there is a kiddushin. Now, according to this, let's analyze machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai was if you know that there was a biyah, do you have to be afraid there's a kiddushin or not? If you say that the fetus, the Tanakama is going like Beis Shammai. The Tanakama here that says that you don't have to be chayshish is going like Beis Shammai, you don't have to be chayshish. But Yehuda is going like Beis Hillel. So that means that you have to assume that this Mishnah, we're going like Yehuda, because we wouldn't go with the Tanakama. The Tanakama is not going to learn that pshat in Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and that means that they're ending up paskening like Beis Shammai, which we don't want to do. Okay, so this is a bias pshat. Rava doesn't like this because it says af. What did Yosef mean when he says af chayshish? You're also chayshish for kiddushin? That doesn't make sense. So therefore, Rava says his own pshat in the Mishnah. Rava says af means is going back on even in the case where you didn't see that there was a biyah at all. You have to be chayshish there was a biyah, and you have to be chayshish that it was shem kiddushin. Af, you even chayshish that there was a kiddushin. According to this, no opinion in this brisa fits with the way we want to learn Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. The Tanakama only fits with Beis Shammai. That he holds that if you know that there was a biyah, you don't have to assume that there was that it was a shame kiddushin. That's Beis Shammai's opinion, and we don't want to learn that way. We don't want to learn that the Tanakama. We don't want the Tanakama to be learning Beis Shammai. So he's not learning the machlokes Beis Shammai the way we're learning it. Rabbi Yosef Yehuda doesn't fit with either opinion, because Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says that even if you didn't see a biyah, you don't have to. Even if you didn't see a biyah, you have to assume if there was yichud, you have to assume there was a biyah and it was a shame kiddushin. According to the way we're learning Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, that's not true according to anybody. Nobody holds you have to assume there was a biyah if you didn't see it. Therefore, they're both learning a different understanding of the machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, as is spelled out The Gemara now refers to the next part of the Mishnah, where we had a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosi. What is the status of this woman from the time she receives the get until her husband actually dies and the get is chal? So Rabbi Yehuda had said she's a vadai married woman. We don't consider her to be a suffix that she's possibly divorced, which is going to happen retroactively soon in the future when he dies. Rabbi Yosi says she is a suffix divorced, a suffix married. Can't give misa to somebody who has been with her during this time. Somewhere quotes a brisa. The brisa says this is only true if he dies at some point. If he doesn't die, if he recovers, then this whole status never existed. She was vade married because the tanai is never fulfilled. So Gemara asks, so then how does this work? According to Rabbi Yehuda, if she's not a suffix, she's a vade ish until he dies, so that means that she only becomes divorced after he dies. And according to Rabbi Yosi, it's a suffix, so there's one side that she only becomes divorced once he dies. How do you have a get bichal after he dies? So here the Gemara adds that the case that we're talking about over here is where he didn't say from now, he didn't say mahayim, he said the get should bichal one moment before I died. And the machlokes here is as follows. Rabbi Yehuda says you don't have to, even if he's going to die, it's not going to be a second from now. You don't have to be concerned that this is the second before he dies. And Rabbi Yosi says no, you do have to be concerned that that is the situation, and therefore all that time she's a suffix married suffix gusha. The Gemara now quotes another brisa. This one brings 4 opinions as to what is the halacha of this woman between the time she receives the get and the time that her husband dies. And there are a number of other halachos that are dependent on this. We're going to discuss what the husband's halachos are towards his wife, and who is possibly a suffix if she's his wife. And the Gemara will differentiate what is the difference between these opinions. So the first opinion is the Rabbanon. The Rabbanon say the husband has full rights as her husband. He gets her found objects, he gets her work, he can be made for her nidarim, and if she dies, at that point he inherits her. He can also be matame to bury her if he is a Kohen. Bottom line, Rabbanan say he's her wife, he's her husband for all halachic issues. She's his wife for all halachic issues, except that if he dies, she becomes a grusha and not a almana. Brisa says this is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Now, Rabbi Meir holds if she has a bia at this point with someone else, it's totally. We have to find out what is this bia. It's possible that it's a bias znos because it's possible that she's an ishes if her husband's never going to die, at least not at any point close to this. Also, however, it is possible that he will die very soon, and then she was really divorced at this point, and therefore it's not a bias znos. So her bia is totally. She's not an ishes l'chol davar. Her bia is totally. Now, the Chachamim say something very similar. They say she's considered to be migureshes ve'ene migureshes. She is divorced and not divorced. And Rabbi Yosi says her bia is a suffix. Those two sound extremely similar. The Gemara is going to explain what the difference between them is. So now the Gemara explains the difference between all of these. The Gemara first wants to know what is the difference between Rabbi Meir, who says that the bila is taloi, and Rabbi Yosi, who says that the bila is a suffix. What does that mean? So the Gemara explains as follows. Can he bring a carbon if the one who performs the bia, can he bring a carbon now? Rabbi Meir holds that the get would be chal from now limafreya. Therefore, if he did this bia b'shegeg, he would have to bring a carbon chatos if it turns out that the get was never chal. If the get is chal, it doesn't have to bring anything. Those are the 2 options. Either she is an eshes or she's not an eshes. Rabbi Yosi holds no. She's in a status of suffix because he holds that the get will be chal a moment before he dies, before the husband dies, and therefore at every moment we're mesupik if this is the moment that he died. We don't even know when he dies eventually how far back is called a moment before he dies. We have no idea how far that goes. So she's in a status of suffix, and therefore he would have bring in asham taloi if he does the bia during that time. Now the Gemara asks, how is that different than the Chachamim who said divorced and not divorced is usually an expression that it's a suffix? The Gemara says you're right, they're the same. The only difference between them is if the husband has to pay her mezainis, if he has to give her support or not. As Halacha Rabbi Zera says that a suffix, a megreshes ve'ena megreshes, is a phrase that we use for someone that the husband owes mezainis. The machlekes between Rabbi Yosi and the Chachamim are, does he owe mezainis? And therefore Rabbi Yosi says he doesn't owe mezainis, therefore we're not going to use the phrase megreshes ve'ena megreshes. So the Chachamim say he does owe mezainis, so we will say that she's what's called megreshes ve'ena megreshes.